So I've had a look at the Pendulum Structure Deck, and this is what I came up with. With the Pendulum Structure Deck, if you have it 3 times, you can make a quite playable deck at least. It's probably one of the better structure decks if you buy it 3 times. Maybe the new Cyber Dragon or Cyber Dark deck is also kind of on the same level. But this deck obviously still has some weaknesses. There's some cards missing. I included only normal and rare cards that would make this deck a tiny bit better than it is already. Not any super rares or ultra rares. But I will be talking about what cards you can add, and there are so many videos on what a very, very, very good Pendulum deck would look like. And let me say this, it looks quite a bit different than this specific one. The problem with the structure deck, especially this specific Pendulum structure deck, is there are not really any good staple cards in it. There's like Double Cyclone, or whatever it's called, Double Twister, the trap card that pops 2 back rows. It's not bad, but it's not really played, and especially in a best of 1, it's not really great because a lot of the time it could be a dead card. You could make a Pendulum build, especially, that actually would work with you popping your own cards, but that is not the theme of this deck because this would be a bit more expensive. I am simply thinking about what this deck can be, and right now it is a deck that puts up 1 to 3 disruptions for your opponent and has an okayish grind game. It's not great because you're missing certain cards to actually make the grind game a lot better. One of these cards is Double Iris Magician. If you want to add just 1 card to this deck, then this card would be it. You could take 1 card out, like Time Pendulumgraph, for example. 1 is enough if you have Double Iris Magician most of the time. Technically, running out 2 is still not problematic. You could take cards out like Dragonpulse Magician if you really like. But Double Iris Magician makes this deck quite a lot better because if you pop it, you can actually search Pendulumgraph. Plus, you can search a Double Iris Magician with Duelist Alliance, because this card always is treated as a Pendulum Dragon card. And what does this card search? A Pendulum monster. Very irritating, but this card can search it, so it's actually quite fun. You can search a Pendulum Call, but then you can't pop it in the Pendulum scale at least. So you'd have to like summon it and then pop it, possibly with cards like your Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer, or even with your Sky Iris. But that's some totally different combos. If you want to upgrade your deck a bit, you could run this card and plonk in 1 Time Star Magician, because Time Star Magician would be an inclusion in this deck, but there's not really a card you want to be searching. The only thing that you could be doing is technically search Odd Eyes Dissolver, which a lot of the time doesn't really do it that much. If you have the materials to go into Time Star Magician, which will mainly be by summoning out Harmonizing Magician, you have the material to go into, well, better cards. So at the end, I feel like it's kind of pointless doing it, and including the Time Star Magician, but you could if you really like to. Another upside is if you play stuff like Double Iris Magician, you could go into Evil Swarm Nightmare more often, or any of the Zark, not Link Fusion, Synchron, Xyz monsters that they have, the Supreme Dragon ones that you need to Dark Pendulum monsters, if I'm not mistaken. Then that works with Harmonizing Magician, because there is no other level for Pendulum cards that has Magician in its name, sadly, besides the ones that are all at least super rare. So you cannot really be doing any of this. With one of these cards, it works a bit better. Also, another inclusion, Purple Poison Magician, is not terrible in the deck, especially if you go for a variant that is more Pendulumgraphy. In general, the structure deck has lots of cards that you can play, and it has lots of different versions you can play. They all work kind of the same way, but you could play like some kind of Performapal Odd Eyes version. You could play some strange Performapal version, how you used to play them back in the days. You can play some pure magicians and whatnot. So the structure deck actually gives you access to a lot of important cards, stuff like Pendulum Call, Duelist Alliance, and for Odd Eyes, even Sky Iris. Performapal Skullcrobat Joker is a very important card. To some extent, Wisdom Eye Magician is also very important, and Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer as well, if you want to play a more pendulum-focused build. Other than that, most decks will be using Heavy Metal Force Electromite, as long as this card is still around. I think the OCG goes more around like balancing, being able to special summon out this card, while the TCG just got rid of the card and left mainly every other card untouched that this card abused or was used to abuse this card. So we will see what they do in the future. Thing is, If you play Electromite, this deck will look a lot different. You could splash it in here, but you won't get the full potential of this card then, because mainly then you will be running cards that make it easy for you to get into Electromite before you Pendulum Summon, because then you get more link arrows, you can do more stuff with it, which is what you want to be doing. It's not bad if you have the card, you want to include it, but a lot of the time you might be missing out on some stuff that in a different variant you wouldn't be missing out on. But first things first, I actually want to start talking about the list that I came up with that mainly uses the structure deck with an addition of, I think, you need the Pendulum Graphs, you need possibly one Xiangke Magician, which you don't need, but it's a nice addition, and you definitely need at least one Timebreaker Magician, plus you definitely need 2 Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. Some of the link stuff is obviously good and is not included, so of the synchro stuff you kind of need for the deck, but there's nothing expensive in here that you need that as a super or ultra rare, and that is what I stand for. So starting out Dragonpulse Magician, I include 1 copy because it works, summoning it out with Harmonizing Magician to go into a level 8 synchro, and also this card has an effect where you could technically get rid of one of your opponent's monsters. You don't really want to use these effects unless you really have to, but sometimes your opponent has some kind of floodgate that doesn't deal with spell trap effects, so you could get rid of it by using this effect. And since these cards are mainly searchable by stuff like Pendulum Call, I felt like including it at least at 1. Dragonpit Magician is a level 7, which is quite important for this deck. Also, it's an 8 scale, which is quite important for this deck. Plus, you can pop spell traps, which can be somewhat important for this deck. So I feel like 2 is a good ratio. You could even bump it up to 3 if you feel like that is something you'd be interested in. Double Performapal, Odd Eyes Unicorn, could put it back down to 1, but first of all, it's an 8 scale. Second of all, it's an Odd Eyes monster, which is quite important for your fusion. And third of all, it is a Performapal, so you can actually search it in multiple different ways, using a field spell, using Pendulum Sorcerer, and so on. So I feel like at 2 the card is quite neat. Sadly, it cannot be Pendulum Summoned because you don't have a 0 scale in this specific deck. So yeah, it can be problematic from time to time, and its effect isn't that great. You can gain some life points when you normal summon it, can be helpful, and you can boost, I think, your one of your Odd Eyes monsters if you have like a fuller Odd Eyes setup. Boost some attack points if I'm not mistaken with the pendulum effect, but effects that won't really come up. You mainly use it for its name and for its scale. Performapal, Odd Eyes Synchron, another card that possibly in certain different builds with Xiangke Fibrax are a little bit better than this specific one, but with this you can easily go into certain synchros. Level 7 is possible, but usually you don't really want to because you only level 5 is Persona Dragon, and that is already against most decks a disruption by itself. You could go into level 8s in combination with Oafdragon Magician, and you could go into level 6s, which I included White Aura Dolphin. There's obviously better ones, but this is a card you could be running. Stardust Charge Warrior is another card if you want to have another draw, then that is another card you could be playing. It's also a Performapal and an Odd Eye, so you can use it for multiple different things. 1 Timebreaker Magician to summon it out of the deck by Harmonizing Magician. Bit annoying if you actually draw into it, but technically you could run it at 2 if you like. Didn't feel like I needed to, since the level 8 plays that you have aren't terrible for the synchros, but they're also not really great at all. So kind of possibly want to put this up to 2 maybe, and cut 1 Unicorn, maybe cut 1 Dragonpit Magician, possibly even cut Wisdomized Magician if you like. There's loads of stuff to cut if you feel like you're running short on Timebreaker Magicians. Also, if you have this card in the extra deck, you can actually put it back into your deck with stuff like Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. With stuff, I mean just with this card. Next up, triple Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer helps you clear your pendulum scale, which can be quite helpful from time to time, especially if cards like your Odd Eyes Dissolver would be stuck in it. Problem is, usually this card wouldn't be stuck in it because you cannot pendulum summon Pendulum Sorcerer with Dissolver in your scale, so this is a different kind of scenario where this doesn't really matter at all, because this card will mainly be popped if you need to get rid of it with Sky Iris, but you can search Odd Eyes Dissolver with it, and then get rid of your cards in your zone to be actually using Dissolver's effect, is what I meant to say. So next up, Wisdomized Magician, card that replaces itself, so kind of adds a card to your extra deck. Back in the days it used to be a bit better because then you could pendulum summon more cards out, but with the inclusion of links, this is not as strong as it used to be. Performapal Skullcrobat Joker actually adds you a Performapal monster, a Magician Pendulum monster, or an Odd Eyes monster from your deck to your hand if it's normal summoned. Imagine how crazy this card would be if it's normal or special summoned. Other than that, it's an 8 scale, which can come in handy from time to time. Harmonizing Magician, very, 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 very good card, is one of your disruptions by either going into Meteor Burst Dragon, which then summons hopefully a level 7 scale out of your pendulum scales, and then go into Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, then link Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon in your extra monster zone, or with another monster away for one of your link monsters, send it to the graveyard, trigger its effect, special summon out Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, or if you have already different lines to go into this, you can go into Frame Lord Zeta. Obviously, you can play any other level 7 like FA Dawn, Dragster, and whatnots that you have. That is a lot better than the rare ones, but Zeta isn't terrible. You can talk about special summon monster opponent controls and banish both that monster and this card. Thing is, it only really works on links or on cards where your opponent doesn't read this card because it's in face-up attack position. So your opponent could play around your removal by just summoning all of their important combo pieces in defense position if they can choose, which most of the time they can, or they are actually forced to summon in defense position. So you can't really get rid of a lot of cards, but against link decks this can be quite nice, or it basically stops your opponent at least from maybe attacking you if they don't have a way to out your Zeta. Since you can chain it to some effects, it's okay. It's a alright level 7, and that's all I can say about it. One of your next disruptions is actually Odd Eyes Persona Dragon. The effect itself is the important one, which is you can target one face-up monster on the field that was special summoned from the extra deck. It has its effectiveness negated until the end of this turn, which is very nice against these Xiangke Fibrax combos, against the Verti Anaconda combos. DPE comes to mind, you know, all of these kind of things. You can actually stop with it. Problem is, you kind of have to disrupt your opponent early on, and if they don't play this like link climby kind of game, then they could just run over this card, because 2400 defense isn't all that great. It's not terrible, but it could be a bit more. But this is definitely one of your stronger cards to put out. Next, to Oafdragon Magician. I like to run 2 because the effect of the card is actually not too bad. Thing is, you can't really do much with it on board besides recycling stuff that you've dumped into the graveyard by Pendulum Call or by Fusion Summoning or whatnot, but that can be quite nice. Plus with Odd Eyes Synchron, you can go into like a level 8 Synchro monster if you want to, so that works. The effect that can come in handy is actually the scale effect, which makes you be able to get one card back from the extra deck to your hand. Problem is, most of your high scales are actually not magicians, so it's quite hard to use that effect. So if you want to cut one of them, feel free to do so. One card that I want to say is the big star of the deck, but it's really not, is Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. You can easily search it. You can use it to go into your 2 fusions, but for this one, you don't even need your Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon, because you can just need to use Persona Dragon, and I think you only run as Beast as Unicorn. I've basically never used Beast Eyes because the effect is not overwhelmingly great, and yeah, I think that's all I can say about it. I've never had to use it, but it's included in the structure deck, and it's sometimes okay, so I wanted to include it. But obviously swap those 2 cards out for better cards, and then possibly you don't even have to run Odd Eyes Dragon because it's a scale 4, which is quite terrible, to be honest. And the only real use it has is by being a searchable level 7 that you can use to go into Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon. Talking about level 7s, this card is also quite neat. Plus, technically, it could help you go into stuff like Odd Eyes Rebellion Dragon if you wanted to run this card maybe over stuff like Magician of Hope or anything else that's in this extra deck that isn't really that great. That would help. Plus, against certain decks, this card can be a disruption if your opponent plays a light deck, which sadly none of the good none of the good extra deck monsters right now I think are light monsters, especially not the link ones if I'm not mistaken. They're mainly dark, or I think at Xiangke Fibrax thing water or sometimes earth, but I don't know that many lights on top of my head, so this didn't really come up as its effect. But it's a level 7 with 2500 attack and it's searchable, so I feel like this card is quite nice. You could play 2 of it if you don't want to go for a Dragoncaller Magician. Dragoncaller, funnily enough, can be annoying for your opponents if they play floodgatey kind of stuff or whatnot. It has an effect where you can make one face-up monster on the field, not on your side of the field, become dragon type, so it's not too bad of an effect. Plus it's also quite high attack value. It's a low scale, it's a level 7, can be used for a lot of stuff. The effect that it has, that if your opponent plays a dragon deck, can come in handy, because the attack then becomes double of the monster that uses this as an Xyz material, so you can boost your Odd-Eyes Absolute Dragon for absolute no reason. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it is definitely playable at least. I think this card was used in certain variants that kind of are dragon linky, and you could make your monsters dragon, so you could link them away for these guard dragon kind of combos, but that isn't a problem anymore. Performapal Odd-Eyes Dissolver is I want to say great card if it was level 7. The fact that it's level 8 makes it a lot worse, because it's a 4 scale, so that a lot of the time hinders your main plays in this deck. It also cannot be pendulum summoned in this deck because you don't have a scale that is higher than 8, so this is problematic. This is just a searchable card that you can use at the end of your turn to go into your Vortex Dragon and get a second disruption on board, because Vortex Dragon is one of your big playmakers. So I would definitely use it, run it at 1, but it has its massive problems in this deck, which I don't like, and it probably works better in an actual Odd-Eyes version of this deck, which I might be making at one point, but not sure about this yet. Pendulum Call, great card to search stuff. Only problem is you cannot pop your own Magician cards in your spell trap zone, which can be problematic, especially with Wisdomized Magician. You have to watch. You can only activate this card if you didn't use a Magician in your Pendulum zone so far this turn, which is yeah, sometimes problematic if you forget about it, especially with Wisdomized Magician, but shouldn't be a problem most of the time. Pendulum Fusion won in this deck because it's searchable by Duelist Alliance, and you might want to use this card to actually use your pendulum scales at the end of your turn to go into a Vortex Dragon, which adds another, well, negate to your board, which can be quite neat. Sky Iris helps you pop cards in your pendulum zone, which is quite neat, since you can free up some space, get stuff to extra deck that you then can pendulum summon out. Plus it helps you get the right scale from your deck, because you run stuff like an 8, you technically run a 6, which isn't that great. And you can go for a Dissolver, which is an Odd-Eyes card which you can search, and you can search a scale 1, always want to say link 1, and a disruption at that as well if you already have a low scale. So Sky Iris is a card that is quite neat. It can trigger your Star Pendulumgraph as well if you happen to draw this card, since there's not a good way of searching it. There's Duelist Alliance that can search it, but mainly you would have to hard draw these. This is another disruption that you can have, since you run quite a high count of Pendulum Magicians, which you can actually search some of as well through stuff like Skullcrobat Joker, which is quite important, and obviously Pendulum Call. So you should have enough Magicians in your deck. If you feel like you're lacking Magicians to actually trigger Time Pendulumgraph, then cut down some of the non-Magician-y things if you like. You could possibly get rid of Pendulum Dragon and one of the unicorns, for example. That would make it a lot easier to get them, but most of the time you will have one. Even if you can't pop them, that doesn't matter for Time Pendulumgraph, because if you can't pop it, you can still target one card your opponent controls, I think, and send it to the graveyard if you didn't destroy 2 cards, which is actually super, super nice. So that is the main deck. The extra deck, nothing special. Double Vortex Dragon, very good. Beast Eyes, not so good. Rune Eyes, not so good. White Otter Dolphin, it's okay going second for like a budget deck, but obviously there's better cards. Meteor Burst Dragon is actually quite okay, because it helps you going into your combo with Absolute Dragon into a Vortex Dragon. Frame Lord Zeta, like I said, you can get better level 7 Synchros. Same with Avenging Knight Parshath, you can get better level 8 Synchros. This card is, well, it basically has no use. You could cut it, but you kind of need level 8 Synchros that at least do stuff. Enlightenment Paladin, a card that can do stuff since you run quite some important spell traps. It's in the structure deck, so I wanted to include it. It's not great, but it's also not terrible. Same for Nirvana High Paladin, because you could summon it on multiple different occasions, especially with Enlightenment Paladin and Odd-Eyes Synchron, and it does stuff. It also has some pendulum kind of shenanigans it can do, so I felt like it wasn't terrible. Magician of Hope is a card you could include. Didn't feel like I needed to, but it does stuff, and it's a high scale that you could end up with having. So yeah, it's okay, not great. Gravity Controller, basically to send Absolute Dragon to the graveyard. Cross Sheep does some stuff if you fusion summon, get stuff back from your graveyard. Your fusion materials, then you could climb into Deco Talker, which has some pseudo protection for your cards. Nothing specifically great, but it does do that for free because you have this card already. Astrograph Sorcerer card you could include. You could run Planet Pathfinder, since you can Pendulum summon it out and then go into Sky Iris if you wanted to do certain things with Performapal or Ice Dissolver, because you can search it with Sky Iris, so that is always something to consider. Obviously all of the Pendulum Magicians are quite nice. Gatling Ghoul is a card you could be running to finish off your opponent. It's not that bad going second or in the grind game. Sometimes you can get it out, sometimes you can't. Baguska, a very good card because you have lots of level 4s. Terraforming, same thing with Sky Iris. Technically you could run Pendulum Hold. A lot of the time I felt like when I drew this card I would rather not have it in deck, but in theory it is at the end of the turn, kind of, if you want to use one more thing at the end of the turn before you pass turn, and you won't search anymore. It's a Pot of Greed, so not terrible. Also, what you could run Pot of Prosperity to make sure that you get into your actual combo pieces, but then might as well run a better version of the deck in general. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. There might be coming some replays soon, maybe not so soon. We'll see if I can find the time, but most importantly, I hope you have a good day.